Welcome back to another episode of the Dyslexic Maverick. I'm so excited to have Jess here. Jess, I've gotten to know a little bit over the past couple of months, and she is just such a dynamic individual. I know this is going to be a great conversation. So, welcome to the podcast. One question I always ask listeners is: do you have multiple drinks around you right now?
I actually know what? I'm usually a beverage gremlin, but today I've got my water. Do you know what it is? I thought we were recording at 9, so I had all my beverages then, right? I had my coffee, I had a sparkling ice, and I want another sparkling ice. But yeah, no, I don't right now. Usually I do. One for fun, one for caffeine, one for hydration.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Yeah, it is, it's a thing with us that every guest so far has had that. So, and then I have another funny question that I don't usually ask, but I
Go
saw it
for
on
it.
your Instagram and I thought it was super fun. So, socks or no socks? 'Cause now that I think about it, it's very much a thing, like one side of the coin or the other.
Right now, currently, socks.
Socks.
Uh, it depends on how clean my floor is.
Ah,
I have wood floor, right? If I had carpet, wouldn't matter. I could have bare feet, but socks. What are you? Are you a sock person?
no socks
Mm.
ever, which is slightly troubling in Ohio in the winter. Um,
But I understand, like, I can't have socks in bed and things like that. It's purely, I don't usually wear socks in the house. I have like house shoes. I have like flip flops that I wear in the house. But today's kind of cold, so I have my socks on. But I'm more of a, but I guess in the grand scheme of things, I would like to have socks off. I would like to, but it's not always a reality.
And, you bring up a good point about the clean floors because I'm such a floor person. I will vacuum every single day.
That's the point. That's the whole. Well, for me, that's the problem. Is like, what's worse, the sock or the unclean floor? Like, and when I say clean, I mean like immaculate. And I have 3 dogs, so it's never immaculate. So it's always socks. But right now, physically socks.
Actually, today I do have socks on only because I have my running shoes on, and
Uh,
it's like a thing that I'm, like, talking myself out of, like, "It's fine, Nancy. It's fine, Nancy.
if
They're
you have
just socks."
shoes on, it's fine. You
Yeah.
need to wear socks with shoes, especially running shoes. Ooh.
Yeah. Oh, I usually don't, though. Even running shoes. I know it's terrible. My husband always gets on my case.
What kind of running shoes have you got though? What's the brand of
The
shoe?
Adidas Ultra Boost.
Can you just like put them in the washer?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
And it's probably not good for them, but I do. Gosh, I didn't, like, realize this was gonna be so revealing about myself.
I have my running shoes are Allbirds, and I love them. They're like
Yeah.
eco-friendly and they're really comfy, and you can just throw them in the wash. Like, they're perfectly fine to throw in the wash.
Yeah.
If it was me, I would have, like, I don't know. It depends how much your feet sweat. Depends if you're a sweaty person.
Oh, my family would definitely have so much to add, so I'm glad that they're not on this podcast right now because they would be like, "Oh, yeah, like, her shoes
The
smell
shoe
terrible."
thing, yeah, it's weird.
Super weird. Oh my gosh. Alright, well, let me give you a formal introduction after that super odd, intro question. So Jess is a PhD candidate in astronomy at Vanderbilt University. She is the programs and communications manager at the Frist Center for Autism and Innovation at the Vanderbilt University School of Engineering. And maybe most importantly, she just recently launched her own nonprofit, the Neuroverse Initiative, which operates uniquely in the intersection of space, science, and neurodiversity with a mission to support neurodivergent space scientists in training, research, and advocacy. That sounds super, super exciting. So, Jess, maybe could you give listeners just a little bit of overview of kind of what your brain, like what type of brain do you have, and just so we kind of know some of your strengths and maybe challenges.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big question, isn't it? And I'm glad you are. I mean, that's the point of these podcasts, right? For me, it is a mix of autism, ADHD, and OCD. With those having more, like, those have kind of changed in prevalence over my life, depending on where my diagnosis was, what I knew about myself, where I was. Um, but right now, like, I mean, I could talk about how this changed over my life, but my challenges and strengths now are very much framed around how my brain works. I've learned a lot about how my brain works and how to use it to my advantage. That's not to say that there are no challenges. And I am sometimes guilty of framing it in like the superpower narrative, which I understand is a privilege. But it doesn't mean there aren't challenges that come along with it. So, and honestly, it depends on the day. Wow. So strengths wise, I can run 3 full-time jobs and survive somehow. Um, or at least outwardly look like I survive. That is a function of hyperfocus, which I have in spades. And if I'm in the right mindset, like if I know, like, so for instance, the end of the year is coming up, and I promised myself I would have like the bulk of my thesis written, and I know that every day I can, like, as long as I have my many drinks and my like correct setup, I can focus on that, and as long as nothing distracts me, I can do it. That is a real, I know that that is a benefit. The downside of that being I forget to eat and drink and go to the bathroom and those kinds of things. So that's a strength for sure. I'm also very like, I'm a big thinker, right? Like, I'm very visual minded. I'm good at problem solving, and I'm a solutions person, and I feel like that. I feel like that's from a lifetime of trauma and like having to fix, right? Having to fix things. Is that now I don't have. How did my mum used to put it? You don't suffer fools gladly. in that I need, like, if someone's not a solutions person, if they're not like, if they're faffing or going on about, and I'm a when it comes to emotional issues, like, I'm definitely a do this because we all do. But if it's like if it's a mechanical problem in the world that can be fixed, and people are like, oh, I don't know if I no, right? Like, solutions only. So I'm good at that. Difficulties. All the classic ones like chronic pain, sleep issues, mental health issues that are, again, like, down to late diagnosis. So yeah, the classics, the big three. And then I would say, depending on the day, depending on how much sleep I've had, the ADHD can be an issue. I can get like hyper fixated on the wrong things. I can get like real emotional ups and downs. And for the most part, I can recognize them. Like, I know exactly what's going on in my brain. And I'll say, like, to my friends, like, oh, having this mini meltdown about this thing. And they'll kind of be like, oh. And I'm like, no, it's fine. Like, I know what it is. It's not going to end. But I feel like it will. So that's the downside. And then the usual kind of, I say this as usual because I just talk about it enough with people, the kind of just feelings of belonging and issues with, imposter syndrome and personal, how I feel about myself personally and things like that are always a challenge. So yeah, I say most of the challenges are like emotional in nature, or internal, right? And again, that's a privilege.
You know, one of the very first things you said was, "When my desk is set up correctly, I am really like, I'm on fire," basically. Those are my words, not yours. But what is can you, like, talk listeners through what is your desk?
Yeah, I mean, I would show you it, but actually right now it's a mess because I've been working kind of, it's funny. Sometimes I'll go through these stages. So I have an iMac set up here, but sometimes I do night shifts at a telescope. So I have my laptop, and I'll go through phases of it. Again, it depends on like where I am emotionally, as to where in the house I can work, or like where I can work best. And some days it's not going to be my office, and that I just have to be okay with that. So like some days, if I'm really not in a good place emotionally, spiritually, whatever, I'm going to have to work from my bed because I know that everything I can control, like my comfort, if I can do that, then I can get something done. Do you know what I mean? So recently, actually, I've been working out on the couch with Criminal Minds on in the background. Criminal Minds is my current background noise. It's ridiculous because I put it on and then I put my headphones on so I can't really hear it. Like, that's what has to I just have to have some like noise. And for some reason right now it's Criminal Minds. And I think there's this autistic coded character in it called Dr. Reed, right? So it's basically a crime show. And I never watch crime shows ever, but the reason I watched this one is because of this guy, right? And he's on this part of the FBI that like basically profiles people. And I know that's all kind of been disproven now, but it was, created many years ago. And he's got like 6 PhDs. He's clearly coded autistic, but the actor who plays him is like really gorgeous. So I'm like, this is fine. Like, I can see representation and I get to look at his face. But my desk, like when I'm in a good place, which is not right now because I'm trying to finish my PhD, my desk is a standing desk, so it moves up and down. I have my iMac and a bigger screen to my left. I have a light here, which I can kind of pull over. It's just a desk lamp. It has different wavelengths. So right now it's on like the warm one. So that helps me like wake up and go to sleep. I sound like a tech bro when I talk about this stuff. I have like cup holders, and I have lots of fidgets. Oh my God, they're all under things. I have a coloring book of aliens right here. I have lots of different types of pens.
That's awesome. A cup holder, like, so it doesn't take up desk space? Is that?
It's attached to my desk. It's because I'm a nerd.
Yeah. That is something I've never had, and now I'm like, "Oh, I need to go on Amazon and get one."
I love this desk. I wish I should be paid by this company. It's called Uplift, and they make them bespoke, right? And I have it. I've never attached it. I have a hammock that goes underneath it, which is very extra. So it's like really strong. It's really strong. I love it so much.
Wait, is a hammock for your feet or for your body?
Both. So I have a foot hammock and a body hammock. Yeah, I know. It came with it. And I was like, I'm never going to have time to attach this. I didn't, evidently.
Sometimes we say set up our desks for success, and then we're like, but what does that really look like? Right? And it's different for everybody.
It's not going to work every day, is it? Like, I know that the reason we met is because Dave Thompson put you onto me. And Dave is one of those people who, like, I don't think he would ever let you see his desk be a mess.
Uh-huh.
Do you know what I mean?
Uh-huh. I do.
It's isn't he? And like, I don't know if his desk ever is a mess. I'm sure it isn't. Like, oh, I don't know. Because people say that I give the impression that I have everything together, but like,
Yeah.
not. So, I mean, maybe it's good to share that, right?
I think it is. I think it is. And honestly, so I have some clients that come into my office, and it's like a mad dash to clean before they come. I almost never do until like I'll have like 17 Starbucks cups. It's terrible. My house isn't like that, but my office is just this like because I'm like working, I just forget about everything else if I can't see it.
If you can't object permanence, right? Can't see it exist. Yeah, that's a problem. Because I basically close the door to my office when I'm not in it. So this also becomes the catch-all room. So like you can't see it because I definitely blurred my background on purpose, but behind me, oh, you can. There's a giant suitcase there. I just got back from a convention and it's filled with like handouts and pamphlets and merch and swag and like, am I opening it to go through it? No. It's going to sit there until the next convention in January. Right in the way, so I have to step over it. Suitcase. That's another silly question you should ask people with suitcases. Are they like an immediate unpacker or a never unpacker? I'm a never unpacker.
I used to be never, and I do it immediately now.
I know I should, but if I don't, it won't get done.
Half the time I just take out what I need to take out and I leave the rest in, and then I put it away still.
Yeah.
Like that, the promo stuff would stay in until the next time.
Because I don't need it otherwise, right? Like I'm not promoting myself in my house.
Right. Exactly. Oh gosh. Can you just tell people a little bit about what do you actually study as a PhD candidate in astronomy? I'm fascinated with what you do and how you describe it, because I think you describe it in a way that makes sense to people. Like,
so I work in a field called Galactic Archaeology, which is fairly new in that the premise has been around for a while, but we just got to the place where we can kind of get the precision we need to get the measurements that allow us to really to answer the questions. So what Galactic Archaeology is it's using the kind of different constituents of the galaxy. In my case, it's stars, where you could also have like dust or black holes or whatever, right? To understand the formation and evolution of the galaxy. So just like on Earth, an archaeologist would use like pots and pans and daggers and whatever to understand the history of human culture. So it's like using the stars as artifacts. Now, I always feel my brain is like, you have to always say this, even though it's like not relevant. I really think it should be called galactic paleontology because stars are more like fossils than lithics, but whatever. I'm not high up enough to make that argument. So anyway, galactic archaeology. So I study stars in the sense that I take these big samples of stars and I use them to determine the history of our galaxy specifically. So you can do galactic archaeology of other galaxies, but it's harder because it's harder to see all the stars in a galaxy that isn't ours. And the way we do this is through like a very multimodal approach, which is why it's only been possible recently, because we also need to be able to see a lot of stars that are really far away, and that's a technical challenge. So we use three methods. We use one that's called astroseismology, and it's using essentially starquakes, right? So the Earth has earthquakes, stars have starquakes for entirely different reasons, but those can be measured. And just like an earthquake on Earth can tell us what's inside the Earth, like we measure the waves as they go through it. This is something that a lot of people kind of pick up in school, but I'm not sure if it's like common knowledge. As the waves go through the Earth, they bounce off things. We can tell the densities of things. It's how we know our Earth has a core. Stars are the same. So when we measure that seismology, we can tell what the star's made up of. And from that, we can get a very precise age of the star. So that's the first thing that we really need to talk about history is age, obviously. The second thing is chemical abundance. So that's what the star is made of, right? The same as, if I was to, look, I have like kind of an ancient looking pot, which is definitely from TJ Maxx. I actually don't know. I think I found this in this house when I moved into it. This pot is made of probably plastic. No, it actually feels like clay, to be fair. So that would be the composition of the artifact, right? In stars, we have hydrogen and helium are our main constituents, mostly hydrogen. But stars also create all the other elements that we know and love: our gold, our silver, also carbon, quite important, oxygen, basically everything. And as stars age, how they change, how they create things changes, what they create changes. When they die and form new stars, what those stars are made up of changes. So that also tells us about the history. And we do that through something called spectroscopy, which is essentially smelling the star and working out what it's made of. The third thing is called astrometry. And this is the positions of the stars and where they've come from. So it's what we would call very precise positioning. And it can tell us exactly where a star is, how it's moving relative to the galaxy, and also where it originally came from. So there's many stars. Some of the most interesting stars weren't born in our galaxy. They were sucked in. And we can tell the difference between those stars by using this combination of these three things, because they might be older than our galaxy, in which case they can't have come from it. They might be made up of things we don't see in our galaxy or not in the same abundance. Or they might have look like they've come in what we'd call kinematically. So that's movement-wise. So yeah, that's all of galactic archaeology in a nutshell.
So my big question is, why?
So astronomy is a really interesting science. Well, the astronomers are going to kill me. I always say this. I feel like astronomy is kind of like a luxury science. Like, we're not saving any lives. We get to. That's a lie, right? Like, actually, astrophysics and engineering and all those kind of intertwined space sciences do a lot of big things in the world and are necessary for our future. Like science, the astronomy is a very important science. But when I think about the stuff I do, and I think about people thinking about the big far out things like black holes and cosmology, I do sometimes think, are we just messing around? But the interesting thing, I mean, there's the big questions here, right? Which are like, how did we get here? Like, why Earth? Why now? Why us? Is there anyone else around? Right. So that they're one of the interplaying disciplines is exoplanets, astrobiology, these ideas that there's other life in the galaxy. And galactic archaeology plays into that, right? In that if there are certain historical situations within our galaxy that don't happen in other galaxies, that could be indicative of why there's life here. It also could be that the elements necessary to make us in this particular amount came from somewhere else. Like, we don't know, right? So that's kind of one of the big questions. Another one, galactic archaeology is interesting because it plays into, like I said, a lot of different subdisciplines. The first one being astrobiology, but also things like larger galactic formation processes. So we're just one of trillions of galaxies, the Milky Way, right? And it has about 200 billion stars. So if you think about that en masse, that's a lot. And there's many astronomers out there who don't actually care much about our galaxy. They think about other galaxies, right? And they can image them and they can look at them crashing into each other and stuff. And they care about how those galaxies formed, because that looks back in time and tells us about the beginning of the universe. So what we can find out from our galaxy can also play into their models, right? It can say, like, is this similar to what we think happened in the past? So that's another kind of area. And then there's also just the kind of, those are the big things, but then there's also these smaller areas like, for instance, I said with astroseismology, we can get really precise ages of stars, and ages are really important for history, but they're also important for lots of other reasons, right? Like if we know the age of something, we can tell when it's going to die, we can tell when it was born, we can tell what it's made of, we can compare it to our sun and our situation, we can look at the planets around it, see if life has evolved. And in order to make those measurements precise, we have to have a lot of data to validate our theories, validate our equations. So galactic archaeology can support that as well, because I have to collect all these ages for my work, but then I can also look at that's actually the code that broke this morning. I went to try and say, oh, I'm going to prove this thing, and it all broke, and now I'm panicking that I've broken science, but it's probably just me being an idiot. So there's those things as well, right? So it's galactic. I really like galactic archaeology because, like I said, it's kind of new, but also it reaches out to a lot of different subdisciplines, but it also pulls us back in and makes us look at, like, really think about precision, and really think about the math, which I find really interesting, and a lot of like theoretical work. Yeah, which means I get to talk to theorists, which I love because they make me feel very stupid. No, it's not in a mean way. Like I'm in awe of all my theorist friends because I have no idea what I'm doing half the time, and they sound like they do.
I understand the feeling. It's probably similar to my feeling right now of like, wait, what did you just say for the
That makes sense. It's sometimes hard to not put it in a conceptual, like, it's hard to not think of it in like a philosophical space when I'm explaining it, because it would be easy for me to say to another astronomer, like, oh, I'm doing this because of this, and they can tie all those threads together, right? Because it does sound a bit mad.
It's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. So have you always been interested in science?
No.
Or when did this okay, can you tell us more?
Yeah. I was a musician until I was about 22. And then I got really sick. I lost my voice and I couldn't sing anymore. And so the long and short of it is, and this before I was diagnosed, it actually turned out to be a co-occurrence of autism. It was a whole thing. But I sat down with my best friend and she was like, what do you want to do? And I was like, I think I want to do astrophysics. And she was like, are you kidding me? That you've never expressed an interest in that ever? And I was like, no, I just feel like I do. And I knew I was interested in it, but I didn't know, couldn't put pin in why. I think it was math, like music's maths, right? So I did that. And one of the things, I say this story, I tell this story a lot, and she always, I don't know if she ever listens to anything I do because she's back in London, but she sat me down because she was like, there's no way. I was going to have to go back to college. I was going to have to do all this stuff. I was already in my 20s. So she sat me down, she printed out or like got up on the camera, on the computer or something. She lived with me at the time. Every course that the local university offered, which is the one I wanted to go to. And there was like 1,000 courses, and she made me go through it because I couldn't tell her why astrophysics. I had no idea, other than I thought space was kind of cool. So she made me tell her why not all the others. That was a process, but I'm really glad she did it, because now on the days when I break science, I'm like, thank God, because I know that it was never going to be law. It was never going to be classics. As much as I love classics, I want to make some money. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, so did you had no interest in science growing up?
No, not really. I mean, in the grand scheme, like, I was good at science. I thought it was cool, but like I never really. In fact, my high school science teacher was awful. She hated me. She was really mean to me. To be fair, I was horrible to her as well. I'm not gonna not gonna beat about the bush. Like, I was really not a very good kid. But once I got I guess the reason I started it, I was like, I like space. Space is cool. I think I can do it. I know I'm smart. I think I'm capable. And I'd like to do something that has the potential to have a good career, right? And at the time, I didn't really know whether I was motivated. Because like I said, I'd lost my voice. So I'd basically lost my career, my dream. So I was like in this space where I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be, in 5 years, I'm going to be motivated by money, or if I'm going to be motivated by science, or if I'm going to be motivated by love, or what. I don't know what my motivation is going to be. I need to do a degree that gives me as many opportunities as I can get. And I knew that with physics or the hard sciences, I could get a job in finance. I could get a job in like the military industrial complex if I really wanted, which I don't, but, or I could get a job in academia, or I could try to, which is where I ended up. So that's why I started. And over the years, like throughout my degree, I just fell more and more in love with it. And then now I wouldn't do anything else. So like I think my brain knew like that I would fall in love with it, and that's what I want to do, but I couldn't tell you why. Which is unique. like most of the time people are like, oh yeah, I got my first telescope when I was 4 and I looked at Saturn. Everyone loves Saturn. I mean, Saturn's great, but
No, do you remember the time in college when you were like, okay, astronomy, astrophysics, like, do you remember, like, was there like a point where you're like, oh, this is like, I'm narrowing down. This is
well, that's the thing. In England, you don't major, right? In England, you go in doing exactly what you choose. So like I didn't have a year of figuring it out. Like you get not to that makes it sound like Americans just have like a very breezy time of it. Like I didn't have time to figure it out, right? I just had to go in with a major. And I think it was I don't know, I think I was motivated by something different. Like at the time, I was motivated by getting a degree. You basically get one for free in England. I hadn't got one, so at least not like a traditional one. So I was like, do you know what? That's what I'm going to try and do. Like I'd spent many years doing music, and I think it was, this is opening some cans I've not opened in a while. A number of people around me had said, like, you've always been really smart. Why are you doing music? And that, like, now that I look back on that, I really hate that presumption, because like a lot of the musicians I know are absolute geniuses. And I never thought that being a musician meant you weren't smart. Like you have to be incredibly intelligent to do that job. But for some reason, there was this like elitism that I needed to go to college because I was just like worth that for some reason. And I didn't buy in. I was always like, what are you talking about? But like, I think somewhere in my head, I was like, maybe if I get a degree, they'll shut up. Or like, maybe I can, maybe people think that I'm not using my brain, but I am. And maybe if I just go and get a degree, they'll like be okay with it. Because I never plan, like when I went in, I planned on coming back and doing music. Like I just thought I'll get this under my belt just in case. So I think for the first 2 years at least, I was kind of just like doing it, and I was good at it. So I mean, it was hard. Obviously, like everything's like, advanced math and science are hard, but I enjoyed it, and it was challenging enough that I didn't get bored. So it was fine. And then I came to Hawaii. And I started doing research science, and that was only originally meant to be for a year. And I'm still here. Hi. But I think like knowing this is absolutely what I'm going to do for the rest of my life was probably the first time I went up Mauna Kea, which is the mountain here where the telescopes are. So it's the highest mountain. If you were to measure from the bottom of the ocean, it's the highest mountain in the world. And you can get up there in about an hour. So you can get really like, I threw up so hard the first time I went up. I haven't since. I got really bad altitude sickness, and it was totally on me. Like I just didn't know what to prepare for. I didn't know how to prepare for it. Like now I know, but at the time I didn't. But I remember stepping out the car and like seeing all the lights, like the stars, and being like, oh, okay, this is where God lives. And like completely understanding why the Hawaiians found it sacred, and just having that moment, like looking around all this technology around me. Wow, this could be my job. So that was very cool. And that was probably the moment I was like, oh, I can do this, and I'm good at it, and I can do it forever.
So how do you think being an astrophysicist works with your autistic and ADHD brain?
It is, it's like a lot of, I mean, I don't want to proliferate the stereotype that all autistic people should do STEM, because that's not true. And a lot of autistic people gravitate towards STEM. And I don't know whether that's a function of it's more inviting for autistic people, because in some ways it's really not, which is kind of what my nonprofit does. I don't know. That's a different conversation. But for me, at least, I'm good at it because I'm good at pattern recognition. And a lot of what I'm doing is looking at big pieces of data that don't intrinsically make sense. I'm good at big numbers. Like I'm not necessarily good at maths, but I can imagine a billion a lot easier than I know someone who's neurotypical can. I mean, there's plenty of research around humans not being able to see bigger than, like, to imagine bigger than, I think it's like 1,000 or something, maybe not even that. I'm not saying that I can actually picture a billion. I don't think that's humanly possible, but I can much more easily associate it, I think. And that's important because I'm thinking about things on millions and billions every day. I'm a quick writer, which I think serves me well. Like a lot of scientists don't actually really like writing. I really do. And I found a lot of my neurodivergent scientist friends really like it as well. And that's kind of the currency of academia, is writing papers. And a lot of scientists I know who aren't neurodivergent really hate writing, and they don't get their papers out because they don't want to do them. So that's, I guess, probably a helpful element of it. Nowadays, science is big collaborations, right? So I do spend a lot of time talking to people. But for the most part, I love shutting myself in my office or wherever and just working. There's not many other jobs where you can do that. So maybe that's part of it.
Yeah. I would think it's more even when collaboration happens, it's more like reading other people's work, and it's still, like, a little bit more.
I mean, it depends what area you're in. Like, yeah, I guess for me, at least at this point in my career, like, it's, yeah, a lot of it is that. But I do have, I mean, I work from home right now, so, like, I don't really have to talk to many humans, which is nice. But I will be doing that more soon.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because 'Cause
Yeah.
you're moving back to
I'm not moving back. I've never lived there.
or no right oh, that okay, good, good. So, like, walk us through, like, what are you up to?
To Nashville. Well, it's all kind of up in the air, but yeah, like the plan right now is to move to Nashville. Because I'm gonna start a job there, which is essentially a research position. So like kind of going up this particular path. So I'll be doing a lot of what I do now just for a bit more money, which is nice.
That's always nice, yeah.
But I'll be in a actual office with other human beings, which are all very friendly, lovely human beings if they're listening. That isn't usually my area of expertise, people. Yeah.
When was the last time you worked in an office?
Well, I mean, I work at the telescope. I do nights every now and again, but like again, nights I'm on my own. So the last time I worked in an office every single day was like 4 years ago. It was like even before COVID. So yeah, it'll be fine. It'll be fine.
Yeah, it will be fine. It's just interesting to go back after you've had a
I think I'm gonna do. There are definitely ways that offices can benefit me for certain tasks, but not for others. So I think I will probably negotiate X amount of days at home and X amount of days at work. Because if I want to do my like deep work, my real heavy, intense work, I cannot do that in an office. And like my boss knows me well enough, he knows about my neurodivergence that I don't think he would shoot himself in the foot making me come in every day. Like that's just going to be counterintuitive to him and like productivity. So yeah, I'll probably negotiate something like that.
so your nonprofit,
Mhm.
the Neuroverse,
Mhm.
you said, science can be great for people that have neurodivergent brains, but it can also not be so great. So, can you maybe kind of explain more of what you're up to with the nonprofit and your goals?
Yeah, and I think you can actually really break that down. Like science, fantastic for neurodivergent brains. The people in science, not always fantastic for neurodivergent brains. It always comes back to people. Um, Basically, okay, so the nonprofit is, and I think you described this a bit at the beginning, broken down into these three areas: training, research, and advocacy. And the whole kind of the big umbrella overview is that we work at the intersection of space science and neurodiversity. So space science being your traditional, research astrophysicist or mathematician or whatever, but also engineers, people who work at NASA, like all those are all space scientists too, right? Space is a huge field, and it's also becoming a lot more private, right? There's big companies now. There's a capitalist element of it as well now with space. And as this grows, especially as people start to go to space, like we look at not just space tourism, but like a space workforce, we really want to think about putting neurodivergence first, right? A lot of the time, and this is kind of a soundbite that I will not claim to have come up with myself. A good friend of mine over at a similar nonprofit called Astro Access, Anna, works in this area of thinking about the space workforce for folks with physical disabilities. And they often talk about how, we are, whenever there's a new kind of area of expertise or a new kind of just area generally, and they don't come along very often now, obviously, we tend to think of disability as an afterthought. But we have an opportunity here to think of it ahead of time. And I think this is especially key in kind of neurodivergence, because if you think about space just as an entity, if you can make space, whether that's habitats or launch and landing or whatever, comfortable for people who are neurodivergent, it is going to be comfortable for everybody. Right? And right now, space is not very comfortable, I've heard. It's like not like you don't really want to go there. I mean, you do, I want to go there, but like you wouldn't want to live there. So I think it's really important to forward face us. And the other, so that's kind of that would be like a broad goal of mine, is like making space neuro-inclusive. But on the day to day, training, research, advocacy. So the training area is things like going into astronomy departments and training about neuro-inclusivity, right? So graduate school in general, not just astronomy, not poking anyone particularly, has not always been the most inclusive place. And I'm not just talking about my neurospicy friends. I'm talking about race, ethnicity, religion, gender, sexuality, etc. Right? Because academia is the purview of old white men generally, right, and has always been, and that is changing, which is good, but it's entrenched in these very, institutionalized, like, racism is probably the most obvious one, right? But disability advocacy is a part of that as well. So the training arm is going into places and training for neuro inclusion, starting with graduate schools. The next part, and that could also include things like support groups and stuff like that. The next part is research. So we're performing research into kind of, again, this intersection. So right now, things along the lines of the feelings of belonging for STEM undergraduates and things like that. But we could also go on to research things like, what's the word? Like assistive technologies, right? Headphones, things like that for space travel. Then there's the advocacy arm. So this is the arm that goes out and does things like, essentially this, like our conversation is part of the advocacy arm, right? So it's going to non-traditional places usually, right? So like we've recently been doing a spate of science communication at Star Trek conventions, because that Venn diagram's a circle. Of Star Trek fans and neurodiversity, bless them. Nicest people in the world, by the way. If you ever want to go to like any convention, like if you've never been to like some kind of fandom convention, the Star Trek people are like nicest people. Like both fans and like workers, I guess, like actors and like, the people within it are it's all very friendly. And it's always really fun. So we go there and we do science communication. So me and my CFO will go and do talks about science in between the interesting talks by famous people, and then we have like a little booth and we talk about neuro inclusion, and like people come and talk to us, and so that's more about kind of reaching out to the general public and being like, hey, we don't really look like what you would expect autism to look like. Here's how you can thrive, like and I've had a much more of an overwhelming response to this stuff than I expected. I've had people cry on me. I've had people asking me to sign things, which is very cool. I'm not going to lie. Very cool. And I've been getting gifts and stuff, which is crazy. But that's been really nice to like reach out to the broader public. So that's going to continue to be part of what we do. Yeah.
That's amazing. It is a little surreal to like, when I share my story, I'll see people crying in the audience and I'll think like, "Oh my gosh," like, and like, that's not my intention. Like, I'm not trying to make people
No, I
cry.
don't want people to cry.
Right, I'm like, "Oh, no, don't do that." Like, I've survived, I'm good. But there is this kind of, like, surreal connection with people, or it's a real connection with people that have experienced something very similar, and you're giving them hope,
Yeah,
right? Like,
or
that,
maybe like the amount of people who are like, "Oh, I literally realized while I was talking to you," or like while you were talking, and like that's. I think maybe part of that. I mean, the neurodiversity movement has been moving for a while, right? But it really only is starting to really proliferate amongst like women for a start, and also people who are. I don't really know how to say this because I feel like there's a lot of neurodiversity on things like TikTok, right? And that is both incredibly good and incredibly bad. But there's something vapid about social media, right? So when you actually see it in front of you, like actively talking and showing some element of what you would define as success, depending on how you define that, it can be really revealing, right? And can also be really ameliorating, I think, for people. That's what, yeah. So it's a lot though, isn't it? Because if you're like me, you're an empath, so you just take it all in. So I get
absolutely.
to the hotel room at night. Like the last one we did was in Dallas, and yeah, I take my CFO with me, Liv, who's also ADHD, right? So we have very similar kind of overlap, and we both will get back to the hotel room every evening and we'll just crash because it's like I absolutely adore listening to what people have been through. Like, whether that's so I can support them or so I can hear how they're thriving or whatever, like, it doesn't matter, or like hear about their kids or, all the things. I love meeting people. But, oh wow, is it draining, you know? And then I keep thinking about them, I'll be like, oh, I wonder how like that person I met is doing. But it seems helpful. No one's ever cried on me and been like, I'm crying because you're a bitch.
It's interesting. You kind of hit on how you support yourself through those like those emotional days, right? And I think it's so important. And when we were talking the first time, it was so awesome to hear you say, like, yeah, I'll talk about it, right? Like, I'll talk about what the bad days look like because a lot of times on social media, like, we see like a glimpse of it, but it's not really, right? It's still a little bit glamorized.
The deluge of the quote unquote superpowers, right? Which again, I love representation. I love that we have a platform. I love that people are saying, look, we're wired differently. But I really want to make sure, and this is something I think about a lot at the Frisk Center, which is where I'm the program manager. I was talking to my boss about this recently at the Frisk Center, is that a concern that I have, at least, is at the Frisk Center, we work a lot in the space of employment, right? So like, especially with adults, like getting neurodivergent, but specifically autistic adults into employment. And autism's a spectrum, right? And in my head, at least, from having multiple diagnoses, in my experience, which diagnoses I lead with elicits a different reaction. And autism is one that's still very taboo, right? And it's also a spectrum. So we have our high support needs peers and our low support needs peers, right? And there's a concern, at least for me, that in this movement on neurodiverse TikTok or whatever, into this move into this kind of like superpower mindset and this like, oh, we think differently, which is all great. We're leaving behind our high support needs friends, who are really the people this movement started for, right? And those people deserve jobs and deserve support as much as everybody else. And this is not me saying like, oh, just because you're like, you can manage your ADHD doesn't mean you don't need support. Like, that's not the case, right? What I'm saying is that we can't leave our friends behind who need higher support needs. Because also that's reflected in companies, right? Like, it's a lot easier for companies to hire 100 people who have very well managed ADHD and call it a neurodiversity tick than to hire X amount of people who have high support needs autism, right? But those strengths there are like a lot of I would absolutely, and again, not saying that people with ADHD don't have strengths, they do. Like there are strengths and negatives to every type of neurodiversion. Neurodiversion, that's a whole new one. Neurodivergence. I just invented a new word. I neurodiverted from the question. Did you see that? my autism. Now I'm going to talk about this thing. Neurodivergent. I love it. I'm going to write that one down. I would ascribe a lot of my strengths actually to my autism, right? And like, anyway, that's my bugbear right now. But hard days, oof. I'm having a lot of those recently, I'm not gonna lie. And because there's multiple vectors, I think, to what can cause a day to be hard, right? And because at the end of the day, so there's like the general autism stuff that can make your day hard. Like, for instance, I can wake up and the fire alarm can go off for some reason, right? And like, it's testing itself, it ran out of battery or something, and that can screw up my whole day because it just sets my brain over the edge, right? It fills up my cup. And that's a sensory issue that's very specific to autism. I'm sure it would irritate a lot of people, but like, it will push me over the edge. But there's also, we're still human. So there's also a lot of like day-to-day life things that happen. So right now I'm not going to go into this, but I've been having just a very quite serious life thing going on that like could happen to anyone, not just someone who's neurodivergent. And that is taking a lot of my spoons. It's like very emotional and very much, again, because I'm autistic and things I can't control and that are outside of my routine and that involve other humans that aren't me, that I can't, figure out how to mold to the situation I want. That's really hard for me. And so that's been taking up a lot of my bandwidth, even though there's not really much, like, even though at this point I know that this particular situation, there's nothing I can do about it. I just have to wait until I graduate and figure it out. is still taking a lot of my bandwidth, and maybe more than it would for someone else. I don't know. I'm not in someone else, like, it depends on everyone, right? But like, I'm currently having an elastic band around my little finger because I'm currently reminding myself that my thesis is more important. So every time I wander into this space of thinking about this personal problem, I ping the elastic band and I'm like, I'm focusing on me. I have to keep changing fingers though, because it's like wearing. But you know, it's actually one of those little hair ties. I bought like 400 of them, and actually this is a godsend because most people do it on their wrist, right? But like, I have stuff on my wrist, and I just put my, I don't really have any elastic bands, but these are like $400 for $400 or whatever. Perfect.
That's a great idea. And like, honestly, like, you buy 400, you use like 4, I feel like.
Exactly. No one ever uses more than one, right? And like, so this, and I keep them in my bag, and then also as they stretch out, you can move them up fingers, right? And then eventually they break.
For some of us, it's literally a productive day or an unproductive day, because depending on what else is going on. And so I think it's just so important how, and it affects different people differently. I know sometimes, depending on like the level of overwhelm, like it can be almost like a nonverbal state
Oh
for
yeah,
you.
big time for me. Yeah, like, sorry, I realized I didn't actually go into like what it looks like. Yeah, like a really bad day for me will be like not talking. And it used to be that I wouldn't be able to get out of bed. Now I know, and before I was diagnosed, that was, oh, it's because I have depression, which is what they tell every, woman. But now I know it's not that, right? So it used to be, oh, I'm having depression. I need to cure it or deal with it as I've been told to deal with depression. But that's not the same, right, as how you deal with an emotional overload. So like, when I'm overwhelmed, when I have like a sensory meltdown or whatever, sometimes I'm able to pull myself out. And what that looks like is probably TMI, but I'm going there, is going into my bedroom, stripping off, wrapping myself in the cleanest sheet I can find, because sometimes the dogs get on the bed and like detritus, right? And like pulling it over my head and just lying there in the dark, like complete sensory deprivation as much as I can get, right? Like, no dogs in the room, no like light, no sound, and then hopefully a really, really clean sheet because then it'll smell really good. And then usually like a blanket or a furry, like I have a lot, my house is full of like stuff like this, over the top for like some weight, and if I can do that for like 30 minutes and not fall too deeply asleep, I can completely reset. But that is a risk, because if I fall asleep and I end up having one of those stupid long naps, then I'm a nightmare. So like, it's a very, very tenuous kind of play this game. But that's one of the things. Some days it's irrecoverable. Yeah, I found a lot of it relies on, you like what you said about getting up and like the day progressing. I remember reading, I went through this special interest phase of reading a whole bunch of those like really bad self-help books. Because like, even if they're bad, which a lot of them are, bless them, even if they're bad, I feel like sometimes there's these nuggets in there, and they're very easy reads. So it's kind of like how some people read like romance novels or like beach reads. I'll read these self-help books because they're breakup between like very intense fantasy novels or like biographies and other stuff I read. But I'm wondering if I have any, like, I have Atomic Habits on the bookshelf, which everyone goes on about, like it's the answer to something. Actually, I think it might have been in there. There was a diagram of decision fatigue. No, it wasn't decision fatigue. Well, it was kind of like decision fatigue. It was showing you wake up and like every choice, you have to make a bunch of choices. You make like 30,000 choices a day. And like each of those choices could be good or bad. Like you could put those into two categories, right? And it was basically showing how just because you make a slew of bad choices doesn't mean you then can't make a good one, right? And maybe your day won't end up being top good, but like it will be better than it could have been if you made a bad choice. And I don't super like that because it implies like a lot of regulation that we don't always have. And decision fatigue is real. The further on you get in your day, the harder it is to make good choices. But I try and remember that. Like if I get up and I'm in, and like sleep is a huge part of it for me. Like if I'm well rested today for the first day in a long time, well rested, in that I'm not exhausted. And that's made a huge impact. I was journaling this morning and I wrote it down. I was like, remember this feeling because you haven't had it in a while. and it's very important. It makes it easier for me to, like, when I'm having that thought about the personal crisis, or when I'm thinking, oh, maybe I won't do this coding, I'll just go and eat. I'm like, nope, you got to do this thing. You're an adult. Get the thing done. And that's easier to do if I'm well rested.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. What about nutrition? Does nutrition play into it for you?
So nutrition-wise, I try and make, like I said, really good choices at the beginning of the day. Like, I'll eat like oatmeal and like fresh fruits and protein, because I know that the later on in the day, the worse my decisions are going to be because of decision fatigue, and because I need my safe foods. My safe foods aren't always healthy. I get time blindness, like I'm going to forget to eat, and by the time I know I need to eat, I'm going to be so far gone with hunger that I'm going to be miserable and just want to take a nap. And I forget to eat. That happens a lot. And then I've realized that a real good way to get on top of I know a lot of friends do this, the nighttime snacking thing, like watching TV and like binge eating. I've learned, for me, a way to avoid that is to just go to bed earlier. So I go to bed at like 9, because then I can't binge eat and watch TV at midnight if I'm not awake.
If you're asleep.
And that's actually been the best fix. I started getting up at like 5 and going to bed at 9, and actually that's been a game changer. And most people would say, oh, that's because you have the morning. No, it's because I don't get, because like, even if I was to go to bed at 12 and wake up at 8, that sleep is not going to be as good because I'm going to have eaten all that crap, right? So my body's going to be full of like sugar and corn syrup and all the awful things that American snack foods have in them. So my sleep's going to be shit. So like, actually, it kind of all plays into, it's all a big water as well.
Oh my gosh, water is it. My kids laugh at me. Everyone laughs at me because I'm like, if you're not feeling well, just drink a glass of water. Literally, like I feel
Yeah.
like it solves everything.
Yeah. 100% of the time it'll solve the problem, right? I have a problem with coffee. I definitely drink way too much coffee. I've had to start drinking at least like some of it decaf now, because it's going to get bad. Although, having said all this, I've always had historically low blood pressure, so like maybe I'm safe. Like, I put it this way, like I'll take my blood pressure in the morning after like 2 full calf cups of coffee and an Adderall, and it will be at like 90/60. Like, I'm gonna live there.
Like, are you alive?
It's like dangerously low, yeah.
I think the sleeping and the eating bad foods ahead, like that is such. So I wear a Whoop, which is like a fitness tracker, but
Oh,
it
I have an aura.
do
Yeah.
yeah, and it's amazing if I
Mhm.
have junk food. Like, I can eat whatever for dinner. It doesn't have to be, like, a super healthy dinner, but just a dinner. But then if I do, like, some candy or ice cream or something before bed, about an hour or 2 into my sleep, it is awful.
Mhm.
And, like, if I wasn't wearing this, I don't think I would necessarily correlate it to the bad
Right.
sleep.
I mean, you could probably tie them, but like, the numbers make a big difference, right? Like, I now can usually, so Aura gives you a sleep score, right? Same kind of thing. And I can usually wake up now and tell you within about 5 points where I am, right? Because of like, and I would never have been able to do that before. And I think what the benefit of it, I love a bit of data. I think the benefit is it's removed the blame from me a little bit. Like, I'd wake up in the morning, and if I wasn't productive, I'd be like, oh, I'm such an idiot. Like, duh, 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 duh. But then now I can be like, actually, I got really trash sleep last night. So the fact that I'm doing anything is good, right? And like, I can kind of curate my day based on that. So I get that completely.
I have 2 last questions.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so 1, with the Frisk Center, you work a lot with education and somebody in academia or, going through the education process and going into the workplace. Any, like, a top thing or 2 that people should maybe know or be aware of as they're transitioning into the workplace?
Yeah, I think it's kind of sad, like where we're at. Like, this is why the Frisk Center does what it does, right? Autistic children grow into autistic adults, and this often gets forgotten. And that transition of school to, whether it's school to work or college to work, is really hard, because, or even school to college, right? Because you're losing a lot of that support structure. Be kind to yourself, I would say, but also set up. Like, I've learned in my life, at least, I do go through changes quite a lot because I'm in this stage of my career. It's paramount to like start setting up for change as soon as you can. So like, I know that I'm probably 99% sure that I'm going to be making a move soon. It's going to be a big move. I'm going to have to move animals. I'm going to have to buy a new house, like all these things, right? So I'm trying to get as much, even if it's a little thing, right? Try and get it done as soon as I can. Like, even if it's something like, hey, when I get to Tennessee, I'm going to have to change my driver's license. I know I'm going to be living in this area. Just having the address of the driver's license place like written down on my phone already, right? That's just one less thing. So when it pops into my head, if it's something I can immediately do, I just do it. If it's something that's going to take a minute, I'll put it on the list into the never, never. But that's a part of it, right? Is like setting yourself up for success, like with supports. Another part of it is, I think, trying to find someone who's a neuro-inclusive employer. And we have lists of these on our websites. There's a lot of resources out there if you Google it. And I'm always happy for people to reach out to me. My inbox gets full of people like asking me. I love it. It's way better than like other work stuff. So ask me questions, email me. I'll give you all my information. So I'm very fortunate. I already knew my employer was super inclusive. He's amazing. My advisor at least, and he has my back. So like, I know that I can take risks and I know I can disclose. I know not everyone can do that. I'm standing in a privileged place. Not everyone feels comfortable disclosing. Not everyone can disclose. But to the extent that you are comfortable and able, finding somewhere that is built to enable your success. And trying to, like, you know, people, I feel like people often ask me like, oh, do you wish you'd been diagnosed earlier? And I often go back and forth on this, but essentially at the end of the day, the answer is no. And the reason for that is if I'd been diagnosed as a kid, I would have immediately had the expectations around me lowered, right? And I was always a smart kid. And yeah, like it took me a minute to get to astrophysics, right, which people consider to be this quote unquote smart thing. But as I've already explained to you, like earlier in my life, there were clearly expectations around what smart people do, right? And that is not set in reality, but it's still a thing that exists, right? Like it's still a stereotype that exists that smart people do these particular subset of things. And I probably wouldn't have been pushed to do that subset of things that I really enjoy doing and love because they would have been, quote, you know, allocated to non-disabled people, right? So I'm grateful in that respect. And my advice based on that is do not let anyone tell you can't do something, like that you can't do a thing, right? There is absolutely nothing that a neurodivergent person can't do that the rest of the world can, right? One of the fellows in our program at the Frisk Center, which is the same program I'm also a fellow of, is about to be the first non-verbal autistic PhD neuroscientist in the world. That's amazing, right? How many neuroscientists are there? Like, you know, a handful in the grand scheme of things. And how many of them are non-verbal? Literally none. So if he can do that, and that's not to say like he, you know, is like, he obviously is an exceptional human being, but like, I don't want to go into the place of like disability inspiration that can be a bit muddled. Like anyone can do that. If you want to do that, go do it. Right. And I know there are barriers, especially in America with cost and human rights. Goddamn. But don't like what I'm saying is don't let another person tell you can't, right? Like at least try, because there are always going to be people who tell you can't. So don't be one of them, right? Like don't add to the, God, I say this like I'm such a good self-talker. I am not. I am so mean to myself almost constantly. So
Well, I think that's realistic, right? Like, we know what we should say to ourselves, and then what we really do say to ourselves is very different, and just having that transparency of like, "Look, even right now, I'm catching myself
Oh yeah.
telling you what I should say."
Oh my God, do as I say, not as I do. Absolutely. Because if I'm calling myself a dumb bitch like 15, 16 times a day, guaranteed. And that's not even, and I'll say it out loud. Like I'll be in my house and I'm like, you dumb bitch. I'm so mean to myself. I say things to myself I would never say to another human being. I'm working on it. I'm working on it.
We're all a work in progress, right?
Work in progress.
Oh, that is awesome. Jess, you actually answered my last question in that question, and that was going to be if there is a young person who's interested in space and they're maybe ADHD or maybe they even maybe think that they might be autistic, kind of what is that? Like any words of wisdom? And I think that what you said was perfect, right? Like, don't let anybody put you in a box.
No. Like it's, and although again, I tried to stray away from like the superpower thing, I do find myself, this is going to be really awful. I do find myself now, like friends will come to me when they get diagnosed, right? They'll be like, I've been very vocal about this. I'm an advocate in this space. So people come be like, oh, Jess, I just found out I've got autism. and they've just found out, right? They're going through the like, holy shit, this is a medical diagnosis phase. And I'll be like, oh, fab. Like, let's talk about how you can support yourself. Like, what are your skills? Like, let's talk about your strengths. And they're like, I want to cry. And I'm like, oh, yeah, we have to do that bit first.
I've had the exact same situation where I'm like, "Oh my god," like, parents come up and they're like yeah, the parents are like, "Oh my gosh, my child just got diagnosed with dyslexia," and I'm like, "That's freaking amazing," and they're
No,
like, "Did you hear what I said?" And
I
I'm like,
think
"Yes."
like because we attract neurodivergent people attract each other, right? We're like a pack of what's the internet say? A pack of emotionally unregulated wolves. So we forget that there's normal people out there, right? So like then you see some or you meet someone, you end up in a situation with someone, you're like, oh hello. Like, so when people reach out to me, like, so I've witnessed this a couple of times at these Star Trek conventions, actually, like, because there'll be a neurotypical parent will come to me. And oftentimes, you know, God, my partner who I go with, my CFO, like, she is forever. I need to regulate. I'm so bad at it. Like, they'll come up to me and they'll say something very autistic, and then they'll be like, "So my kid just got diagnosed with autism," and I'll be like, "Oh right, so was that because you got diagnosed?" And they'll be like, "What?" And I'm like, "Oh, you know, because it's genetic mostly," and they'll be like, "It is," and Liv's like, just like, at least tone it down, like.
Like, maybe from 10 down to 5.
At least give them a minute. Like they haven't said their name. Like, it's so
It's the same with me, like, they'll say, like, "Oh, I'm an entrepreneur, I own my own business, and I invented something, and by the way,
like,
my
so you're
daughter"
just something then.
right, I'm like, "Wait, okay, so it came from you?" And they're like, "Wait, what?" And I'm like, "Oh, well, I mean, you just told me, like, this list of things that matches." And, yeah, she's the same, like, I probably should've listened to their name first.
I call it the bingo card. I'll be like, tick. And it's funny. And it is bad. The thing is though, I don't think I think there are very few situations in which knowing your neuro identity, I'm just making up these words today, neuro identity is a bad thing, right? Like, yeah, you may not want to share it with other people, but when I tell you, there are so many people in my life who I'm like, just get assessed, please, for the love of God, for the love of me and everyone around you, because like it will make your life so much easier. If you understood, because like there's all the external part of it, right? Like the talking to other human beings and the being social and understanding over sensory stimuli and blah blah blah. But like there's also all the internal amazing things, right? Like the synesthesias. Like I see time. I thought calendar synesthesia was normal. I thought everyone saw time. Newsflash, they do not. This is really rare. Not just rare, like generally rare amongst autistic people as well. Like it's really rare, and I do it. And so when people say to me now, like, "Oh, I see time," I'm like, "Oh, okay." Well, that's like the biggest tick for me. I'm like, "Okay, well, you're autistic then." Like, there's very like the chance of you not being are incredibly low. But understanding that made me see how much of a strength it was. And then things like I see and feel music. And I remember someone saying to me once at a show, like, you you know, people pay a lot of money to experience music the way you experience it, and they do very illegal things. And I was like, yeah, you're right. Um, and then there's the synesthesia part, but there's also like the interrelation part, like understanding how your brain works and understanding what brings your brain joy. Like when I started allowing myself to see my special interests as special interests and not just like stupid nerdy things from my childhood, my life became so much richer. And that was all thanks to my diagnosis, right? So like there were also a couple of like physical things around it that I won't share because this podcast is probably PG-13. But like there's a lot of benefits to getting diagnosed.
Jess, it has been such a pleasure. I think we could do this for another 2 hours. I don't know if anybody would listen, but I would have a great time. I know that this is, like, the worst timing with your thesis and
No,
everything coming up.
it's good for a distraction. And while I was sitting here talking to you, I think I figured out how to fix my code.
Oh,
Yeah,
of course your brain is working in 5
yeah,
different
in the
ways.
background. In the background, my brain was, and I also organized a bunch of things on my desk. So you know, I got 3 things done. Yay!
Oh my gosh, that's wonderful. Well, I will link everything in the show notes. So your
Yeah, feel free to use
nonprofit
my email, nonprofit, the Frisk Center. Everything else should be able to go from there.
Absolutely, absolutely. So everyone will be able to connect with Jess and ask her questions, fill up her email box. Yes. Awesome. Thank you again so much. It's been such an absolute pleasure. Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, I would love it if you would consider subscribing. It is literally the best way you can support our work here. And if you're feeling extra generous, take a screenshot and tag us on social with one of your takeaways from the episode. Until next time, friends, embrace that unique brain you've been given.